Well, good evening to everyone. We are very excited to welcome you here this evening, and to those who may be joining us via our Facebook page for Deerfield Beach Community Cares. We are live streaming tonight, which is awesome. That means that we can record this presentation and archive it in perpetuity so that Joel will forever be remembered for what he shares with us tonight. And I think if anything were to be his legacy, it would probably be this presentation. My name is Kurt Schmidt, if we have not met. I am the cantor for Zion Church, and I'm also board chair for Deerfield Beach Community Cares. And I'm delighted to welcome you here to Zion Ministries Under the Cross. This is our chapel, our smaller worship space, but also multi-purpose for many meetings and other things. I had the privilege of meeting Joel about 18 months ago, maybe a little bit longer than that. It's hard to keep track because every day is a new adventure. And he came to Deerfield Beach as part of the Florida Initiative for Suicide Prevention as its executive director. Before that, he had worked in Broward County Schools as the director of dropout prevention, and many years as a teacher and counselor and administrator, and many other hats on the side as well. He serves on the Children's Services Board and chose to bring his expertise to Deerfield Beach. In the first meeting he said, if you want to hire me to do work in Deerfield Beach, I'd love to do it. And by the end of the meeting, everybody said yes. I asked a similar question when he said, I really need a place to ground myself in Deerfield Beach since I live in Pembroke Pines. I said, I have an office next to me at the church. Why don't you come and move in? And so we're neighbors down the hall here. And Zion and Community Cares have formed what I think is a wonderful partnership in that we walk together in separate lanes down the same street. And you're here tonight because you're invested in not only the work of Deerfield Beach Community Cares, I hope, I know that for a lot of people that are gathered here, but that you have an interest in some of these tough conversations. This is the first of 5 that we will have for the next 5 Wednesdays, and we invite you to register for any or all that might be of interest to you, or any that you might want to share some wisdom with a friend or a neighbor or a colleague or a coworker. We're just excited that you're here and to be willing to share in this conversation and to take in new knowledge and allow yourself to move to a better place of wellness is an awesome thing. And we want to celebrate that tonight. So thank you for being with us. Without further ado, Joel Smith.
Thank you, Kurt. I did not know Kurt was going to say all that, but he did leave out really the most important detail, and that I am a New York Yankee fan. This is a subject that's incredibly important to me. I suspect you will find that out very quickly in our conversation. I am the kind of speaker that has no rules whatsoever other than please don't throw anything at me. But if there are questions or comments, I am absolutely willing to take them. This is a multi-day presentation that I have winnowed down to basically the storytelling part. Has anyone in the crowd heard of or is familiar with adverse childhood experience? Some of you have experienced it. Let me ask your opinion. How many people in the room believe we are guided by free will? How many people in the room feel like it's laid out there for us? There's a whole lot of determinism. Well, we're going to challenge some of those thoughts in this next little bit in the story. Derek, the button, please. So we're going to talk about the origin of the ACEs study, Adverse Childhood Experience. And for me, this was absolutely life-changing, and I suspect for some of you, it will be as well as we roll it out. Next slide, please. Button. So it started in San Diego, California in the mid-1980s. Button again, and one more time. Thank you. So Kaiser Permanente is a huge insurance company, and they had a weight loss clinic. And you'll find, by the way, that I'll talk way past my slides, because that's what I do. But they had a weight loss clinic, and it was a very prescriptive program, and they were dealing with incredibly obese people. People that are 200, 300, 400, 500 pounds overweight to the degree that it was seriously jeopardizing their health. And that's the beginning of the conversation. Next slide, please. So the doctor in charge of the clinic was a gentleman named Vincent Felitti. And in my mind, he should win the Pulitzer Prize, because what he brought to us, again, is pretty life-changing, as I hope you'll see. Button, please. Kind of look like me. Next, stick with hair, though. Go ahead. And what they discovered, that these people that were so incredibly obese would really be successful. They would lose 100 pounds, 150, 200, 300 pounds. But before they got to the goal, they quit. This is a critical piece of the information. Before they got to the goal, where they were succeeding and winning, they quit. Next slide, please. As many as 50% of the people just dropped out. No reason, no conversation, just dropped out. Next slide, please. So Felitti, being an intelligent man, decided he would set a series of interview questions, and he would interview the participants. Go ahead. Go ahead. And so he asked, and there's several buttons here, he would ask these questions. How much did you weigh when you were born? How much did you weigh when you started first grade? How much did you weigh when you entered high school? Go ahead. How old were you when you became sexually active? One more button, I think. And how old are you when you married? Typical questions, right? Button, please. Go ahead. So he made a mistake with this obese woman that he was interviewing. And instead of saying, how old were you when you were first sexually active? He said, how much did you weigh when you were first sexually active? He didn't realize he had said it, but that's the way he phrased the question. And that was her answer. I weighed 40 pounds. Your mind is probably already jumping ahead. So, go ahead, dear. So he was astounded. He thought he didn't believe what he was hearing. And he asked the question again. And she burst out into tears. And she was the subject of incest. And he was amazed to hear this impact of this child's life. So go ahead, dear. So he asked 286 of the participants. This started in the mid-80s. Go ahead. This one was a 23-year-old female. But this was her response when he asked. Overweight is overlooked. That's why I need to be. I need to be invisible, because if I lose all that weight, all that sexual stuff comes back. This, to me, as we get into this, is really an amazing difference in the way we look at a lot of how we diagnose people. Next slide. You'll see that in a second. Go ahead. You can keep pushing. I think one more. So, we don't understand the impact of a dynamic number of things that happen to kids, no fault of their own. And you were all kids. We all have had a tremendous amount of trauma in our life. Some of us are incredibly resilient, some are not. But the trauma is an amazing thing. And kids at these ages, they don't call it trauma. They just call it part of life. It's what's happening to them. Next, please. And one more. So all of this stuff is kind of the background to what Fellini started to find out in these conversations. That all of this stuff, now I'm going to jump way ahead here. You all know, you've known for 50 years that smoking has a linear relationship with cancer, right?
Yeah.
Linear relationship. You smoke, you're going to get cancer. Most people, many people. This is not that. This is not linear. This is an amalgamation of experiences, of traumas that change the life trajectory of a person. And even more than that, change the offspring. We'll get to that. Next, please. Go ahead. So to these people, they didn't see the weight as a problem. They saw the weight as a solution, as a safety net. So even though everyone said to them, you're unhealthy, you need to lose this weight, as they lost the weight, the level of anxiety kept going up because it brought back all of the experiences that they had. Next, please. Go ahead. So clearly, just like drinking or any drugs or anything, the food was a tool, a resource, a mechanism of safety. I'm not sure what that says about me, but anyway. Your age. Yeah, that too.
Oh,
But not eating increased their anxiety and depression to fear levels that were intolerable. So I'm not here to do therapy. There are no coaches in the room. But I suspect at this point some of you are thinking and reframing some of the things that happened in your own life or that you know about. And I mean, I have some stories which, if we have time, we'll get to. But it changes the dynamic of the way we look at our experiences. Next, please. It became their coping skill. It became that thing that was their best survival skill, even though it was totally unhealthy. My friend Gretchen, if I can pick her out over there, and when she's anxious, she bites her nails. Okay? Is that the most unhealthy thing in the world? No. But she's bleeding tonight. I guess because she was going to be in the room with me, maybe. I don't know. But so we all have these coping mechanisms, and they're all on some spectrum of what works or what doesn't. Valerie seeks Taco Tuesday because of the margaritas. You know, we all do different things. Next slide, please. And there's a risk and a reward to everything. We all know that, right? You know, for me, because I don't drink or smoke, chocolate. And that's, other than this, that's not the worst thing in the world, except when I get yelled at for eating too much of it. Next slide, please. Go ahead here. Keep going. There might be one more. Okay, hold on. No, okay. Well, that's a good one. So again, it's the risk reward. But, and this is not in the slides, but it was interesting. I was teaching, doing a training for police officers yesterday, the crisis intervention training. And I was sharing them, and I asked them where stress comes from. And of course, everyone said from their brain. And I said, Stress is your fight or flight response, goes back thousands and thousands of years, and it comes from your adrenal glands. And your adrenal glands in the fight or flight mode are sending messages up your spine to the original brain, development of the human brain right here, the lizard brain. And we always have thought that this part of the brain, which is the executive function area of your brain, see, some of you didn't think I was this smart, did you? The executive function part of your brain, scientifically, people always thought it became concrete by the time you were 5 or 6. You were basically, that's what you knew is, the way you learned was the way you learned. We know that's not true. This is plastic until you're about 25 or 26. So Bob, there's no hope for you anymore. I'm sorry. But so what happens is the lizard brain is sending you these fight or flight messages. And instantaneously, your executive function is telling you that's not the best decision. Or yes, do this. So you'll see as we continue on, adverse childhood experiences change that direction, impede the ability of the executive function area of your brain to fully develop. And so, if I ask you to go backwards, are you going to be able to do it?
Yes.
Say you weren't. One more. So you'll see with young people and any people who are really adrenaline junkies, who take all these kinds of risks and risky behavior, I would wager, if you go back and you look at how many ACEs they experienced as children, then you might find that they had significant ACEs which have impeded, which isn't necessarily unhealthy. I mean, I'm not saying every risk is unhealthy, but I'm saying the preponderance of that risky behavior. And certainly, the preponderance of taking drugs or alcohol or smoking too much, any of that risk behavior, we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. Next slide, please. So back to these incredibly obese women and people, men and women, but a lot of women. It's that, that keep calm thing. It helped them keep calm, even though it was unhealthy. So this, to me, is like the first aha. It's like, whoa, we look at a fat person or whatever, and we have judgments, and we have predictions, and we have decisions about them without knowing. There's no door here. What I like to say happened before the knock, before you knew them. The experiences that they went through, or you went through, or I have gone through, that put us in this position. Next slide, please. So this was incredibly simple discovery based on a mistake, based on a total mistaken way of phrasing the question. Next slide, please. But what he discovered was life trauma changed the direction of young people's lives, but of young people's lives that lead them to this extraordinary life change. Button, please. All of this stuff that a kid did nothing wrong, that a kid just experienced, and we're going to get into what they were in a few minutes, because it's pretty specific. Next slide. Okay. So out of this, he said, I need to figure this out. Now remember I said about that linear smoking cancer? This is not linear. This is all kinds of different things. Right? So there were 50,000 people that went through the clinic. Next button. 26,000 people were asked to participate. And 17,000, almost 17,500 people actually participated over time, long time, even to the point where their offspring were being monitored. So this is incredibly powerful research. So it went on from it started in 85, went on through the 90s for 25 years. So this is incredibly validated material. It's important to know, it's frightening to know, that the people that were served by Kaiser Permanente were essentially middle-class white people. So it was a very homogeneous group. So scientifically, that told you something, but it also leaves out other cultural impactors. So we're learning a lot more today, and I'll tell you about that shortly. So again, go ahead, button, and button. So I said that, it's the way we react is, so you start to think about it. Do I make a conscious decision, or is there determinism involved? That's kind of a framing thought here. Go ahead, Peter. Just to share with you, so I was talking to these cops yesterday, And I asked them about where mental health comes from and stress and anxiety. And it's, everyone says the brain. And I tried to share with them that it's the whole body. It's all of us. Because when you are stressed, when the adrenaline is flowing, a number of things happen. And you can kind of see that. Your saliva flow. You start to get a dry mouth. Your pupils dilate. You begin to deep breathe. When you need to oxygenate. Those of you who prepare to run or jog, you kind of automatically do that. Your blood vessels, your body gets warm. Your blood vessels constrict, flow through more narrow, you get warm. Here's your interesting factoid. When this happens and you're tremendously stressed, you can't pee. Why? Well, think of your fight or flight. If you jump up and you punch that bear in the nose and then you start to run away and you get a little bit further down the path, can you turn around and say, "Excuse me, Mr. Bear, I need to stop and pee, don't eat me"? It doesn't work that way. So your body knows and works in a coordinated way so that you can function. And this goes back, to caveman times, to saving your life, the original fight and flight stuff. And by the way, the same thing with bowel movement. You don't poop either. And so that's so often when you're stressed, and then the stress calms down, of which we may talk about a little bit, but what happens? You got to pee. You got to pee. And also you start to have some deep breathing. You may start to yawn, and you say, "I'm not tired." But that's the counterbalance to the adrenaline and the cortisol, the oxytocin and the endorphins, fighting that, essentially fighting it back off to get back to balance. Does that make sense? I'm not trying to be overly scientific. Okay, so go ahead, Derek. So there are 3 levels of stress, just so we're all on the same page. There's positive stress. You got to go to a job interview, you're dating somebody for the first time, you're cooking Hamantaschen and you screw it up, whatever it might be. We get over that, right? We get over that. But it still triggers the adrenaline. When I was waiting for this to start, no matter how many times I've talked to groups about things like this, the adrenaline kicks in and I feel myself sweating and getting ready, and am I going to forget what I wanted to say, or I try and make eye contact and see if people are saying that guy's stupid or whatever, just trying to figure it out. So, but that's positive stress. Then there's tolerable stress. Tolerable stress, and it's different for everybody, but grandma dies, dog runs away, lose your job. We get over that eventually. We don't stop living. Now, I need to make a caveat here. What's tolerable for me may be positive for somebody else. Everyone is different. We all are resilient in our own way, based on our experiences and based on our inner strength and what we do. The other thing that's a little scary is something that's tolerable to me today might not be tolerable to me tomorrow. We lost our dog about a month ago. And we've lost dogs before, and that's been painful. But for some reason, and maybe it's because we're older, this one hurts. It seems to hurt more. And we seem to be looking for our dog. I do, and I know Janie does too, when we open the door. So what may have been less stressful at one point, in this case, is not. And then, of course, there's toxic stress. Toxic stress, if you believe what I'm saying, that's that adrenaline flow that you can't shut off. It's constantly flowing and triggering you. Those of you who feel anxiety, who feel depression, can relate to what I'm talking about. Because no matter what you try and do, meditation, whatever it might be, it doesn't slow it down. You haven't found that right thing yet. Next slide, please. So just to recap where we are so far. This is the fight or flight. It's called the sympathetic system. That's the adrenaline and the cortisol. You do have a parasympathetic system which slows it down, which gets your breathing back to normal, or what is normal for you. That's the release of oxytocin, the love drug, and endorphins. So we do have this chemical balance. But what's balanced for anybody is, Rebecca, it's not the same as what's balanced for me. We're all different. Next slide, please. Again, same, kind of just another picture of the way the adrenal glands impact the brain. Go ahead here. And again. Okay. I want to take just a second and talk about visualizing levels of stress. So first, okay, stop. So let's say that Kurt and I are out taking a walk in the park. And we get to this little brook. And Kurt, being an Olympic athlete, springs right over the brook. Me, not so much. I have new white sneakers on, and if I go home with mud on those white sneakers, I am going to get my butt kicked. And Kurt, being my good friend, is actually putting stress on me. Come on, Joel, you can do this. It's really simple. We got things to do. Let's go. Well, my adrenaline level is rising and rising. And I have choices to make. Now, I could take my sneakers off, wrap around my neck, spring across. I could look to the left and see if there's, a bridge or something. I could look to the right. I could say, Kurt, see you later. I could give up. That's not handling positive stress very well. But we do that. So let's just say I screw up my courage and I leap across with my little short legs, and I'm so proud of myself, and we keep on walking, and we get here. And now, Kurt, being an Olympic swimmer, dives in, swims across, gets the other side in like 7 seconds, and he, come on, Joel, you can do it. Same thing. I got this level of stress building up in me, and my friend, who's not intentionally doing it, is adding to it because, I feel like I'm inadequate. It's only 2 feet deep. You can walk across. You don't even need to swim. So again, I have the same choices to make. We all do this. Going ahead, because I don't have that much time with you this evening. So let's assume I wade across. That was the word I was looking for. Next button, please. And we keep on going, and we get there. And Kurt looks at me, and I look at him, and we go, That would be the toxic stress. That's PTSD. That's that adrenaline flow that you cannot calm down. You can't, the oxytocin and the endorphins are not being released. I don't mean to be too scientific, but this is what happens in our body. And by the way, if you accept this, if you believe what I'm saying, as I hope you do, we'll get to that in just a second. Okay, next slide. Let me keep going. Go ahead. So again, that same kind of a picture. It's so important to me to share with people that it's not just the brain. And one of the reasons it's important is because when we hear something about somebody, we diagnose them. Or if we hear they have a diagnosis, they become their diagnosis. And that bothers me. Because it's what happened before the knock that led up to all of that. That built up to it. So it's the body that responds to all of this stuff. Goes right back to cavemen and fight and flight, in my opinion, in the research I've done. Next slide, please. And by the way, so this cortisol and adrenaline flow is called inflammation in your brain, right? You with me? Am I okay? She's a brain expert. I was a little nervous about this. So in your brain, you have the neurons, and they're protected at each end by myelin. And the adrenaline and the cortisol essentially eat the myelin, which leaves the neurons unprotected. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't give up anymore. But that's what happens. And so, but that's part if you accept that, if you listen to what I'm saying, and you think back to a kid having trauma and having this uncontrollable flow through his or her brain, eating at the myelin while this part is trying to develop, that's like World War VII. And that's what happens to kids. That's what happens to people. By the way, when women hit about 35, they are incredibly susceptible to inflammatory diseases as a result of the stress and trauma that they've experienced, much more than men. So a lot of that autoimmune illnesses that women start to suffer, research shows us, you take it back and you look at the number of ACEs they experienced, which is so important as we're dealing with our teen girls, to give them the tools and resources to be resilient. Because physically it impacts their health. Please. So this is a little bit unclear, but this kind of puts it all into perspective, that the fight or flight, the stress response leads to so many different things. I don't know if you can see it: asthma, heart disease, so physical illnesses, diabetes, insulin needing, but also psychological, depression, arthritis, all kinds of stuff. Just this level of stress, and stress comes from trauma, amongst other places. So, as an editorial comment, you would never say somebody committed a heart attack, right? You would never say somebody committed cancer. But we do say somebody committed suicide. If we respect all the things I've been talking about, if they make sense to you, people die by suicide because of the illness, because of the chemical change in their brain, which leads them to a point where that pain is intolerable and they must end the pain. Next slide. We all seek homeostasis. You can push the button. If you're a runner, that example that I gave, you're getting ready to run, your muscles tighten up, you start to take some deep breaths, you get going, your temperature rises. When your temperature rises, what happens? You sweat to cool your body down. And then at the end of your run, you're taking those, reoxygenating. Kurt, I have no idea about my time. You're good? Okay. So you reoxygenate, and maybe, you're tired or whatever it might be, but we all seek homeostasis. It's just the natural order of things. But it's also a psychological truth as well. That's the balance between the oxytocin and the adrenaline. How do we calm ourselves down? Whether it be journaling or scrapbooking or whatever resource it is. I told the story yesterday to the cops that I shouldn't say this in front of you because I'll live to forget, to regret it. But as I am older, not only chocolate, but I don't know about you guys, but cinnamon. Cinnamon calls me. It really, it calls me. So there'll be times when I'm like going from meeting to meeting and I haven't stopped to eat like a normal person should eat. And I'll pull into one of those, racetrack or whatever it is, and I go to that rack, and on that rack is the most gorgeous, beautiful Texas buns. Right? You know what I'm talking about? And when I tell this to kids, I say, what do I do next? They say, you eat it. No. I open it casually, and I take the biggest, deepest smell of that cinnamon, and then I devour it. But then it calms me down for that next step. And I lie a little bit, and I said, on some days when I'm really stressed, I go 2 in a row. Next slide, please. Good. So just to give you this kind of the scientific term, we all must seek balance. Now, we said about stress, we all handle stress differently, we're all resilient in different ways. That balance is different for every one of us. Some people's balance is at a very high level. Some people's balance, is at a very low stress level. I always, Jamie's heard me say it a million times. People can't see the rage tattoo, but that's kind of, I function at that high level of, you got to get things done. The environmental stressors that we face, the traumas that we experience, that's called the allostasis. And when and the balance of the whole thing is our allostatic load. So you all can be really smart and talk to your neighbors and say, man, my allostatic load is out of control. But that's all that stuff that we're dealing with. Yes, dear, go ahead. Okay, so to wrap up this initial part, button please. It's, to me, if I haven't convinced you, it's about trauma. Trauma unleashes the adrenaline and the cortisol, which changes the way our brain develops and impacts the behavior. I told the cops yesterday, I tell people this all the time. When people are stressed, they may intellectually know the right thing to do, but from a behavioral standpoint, they revert to the survival behavior they've always used. And sometimes that survival behavior is really bad, excuse me. And sometimes it's illegal. And if you look at kids in foster care, or kids who've had those experiences, they don't trust. So they revert when they're given direction. They revert to the behavior that we wouldn't accept. I told the cops yesterday, a kid gets sent down to the office, and little Joel is kind of a little out of control. And little Joel, who doesn't deal well with authority, it wasn't that funny. And the SRO comes over and puts his hand on my shoulder. And what's my survival reaction? Well, right there, that's a felony. That's an arrestable offense. So if I've also cussed at the officer, there's a chance I'm going to get Baker acted and go downtown. So it's anyway. Button, please. Can lead to PSD button, please. And where does it come from? The ACEs. So we're going to get into that now. Are we okay? We'll keep going here. Okay, so here are the ACEs that Felitti, in the research with 17,000 people, discovered made a difference to people's life, longevity, and what happens in the trajectory of their life. Physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, obviously, physical neglect, emotional neglect, mental illness in the family, mother treated violently, and this has been adapted to other members of the family. We now know that their males can be treated violently by women as well, although certainly not as much. Divorce in the family, incarcerated relative, and substance abuse in the family. These 10 things are not, you smoke, you get cancer. To me, if I've done this right, you all should go, holy crap. This is the biggest aha for me. Changed everything I do when I work with people. It's not having all 10 of them. These are each, if you're going to give them ascribe a point system, it would be 1 point for each. And the number of them that you have is where we're going to go now. Change the trajectory of a kid's life and of your life. Next slide, please. So go ahead, 15 years. Again, it's comprehensive rather than linear. So there were some shocking ahas, if you will, from these 17,000 people. For him, the first shocker was there's a direct link between childhood trauma and adult onset of chronic disease, as well as mental illness, doing time in prison, work issues, and absenteeism. A direct correlation between these 10 things and the outcomes. Again, this is really impactful to me. Second, go ahead here. The second shocker, about 2/3 of the adults in the study had experienced one or more types of adverse experience. Of those, 87% had experienced two or more types, which shows that people who had one thing happening, they don't usually happen in isolation. If there's alcoholism in the family, there's a good chance there's going to be abuse. You're shaking your head. You know what I'm talking about. So they don't happen in isolation generally. Next slide. I said that. Okay, thanks. The third shocker was more adverse childhood experiences resulted in a higher risk of mental, and social problems as an adult. The kid did nothing but experience trauma. This, could make you cry. It should make you cry. If you go back to that chart of heart illness and all of that, that's what this is. Next slide, please. To me, go ahead. It's like the mic drop. Keep going. This, to me, changed everything about how I work with families and kids over the last 30 years. Next slide. So, let's talk about the schools and what it means, and then we'll wrap it up. Again, each one was given an evaluation of 1 point. Go ahead, dear. In the study, 2/3 of the people had at least one ACE. Trauma happens. It doesn't mean about people that they weren't resilient. It just points out trauma happens. 1/5 of the people, of the 17,000, had at least 3 ACEs. And you'll see what the impact of 3 ACEs is in a minute. 1/8 had at least 4 of the 10. And I should tell you that they don't have to be 4 discrete. So in my life, my mom was married 3 times. She was divorced 3 times. That's 3 ACEs right there. So it can be cumulative across the system. Next slide, please. Go ahead. So let's say, which is true, America has about 330 million people. 218 million people have ACEs. 66 million have multiple ACEs. I think there might be one more button. Yeah. 41 million people. So look around in this room. 41 million people have at least 3. Well, I have at least 3. 41 million Americans have a hidden dragon that impacts the way they behave because of something they never did, something that happened to them. Which is one of the reasons why so often when we're dealing with people who try to explain mental illness, your diagnosis is not what you are. It's what happened to you. Next, please. Okay. 4 ACEs is a critical point. 4 ACEs is life-changing. They're all life-changing, but 4 is a critical point. If you have 4 ACEs, you're 2 times as likely to smoke cigarettes, 12 times as likely to use drugs, 7 times as likely to drink, 10 times as likely to use injectable drugs. 4 ACEs. Remember that slide back there with all the risky behavior? When I talked about the development of the frontal lobe and your executive decision, that's what we're talking about. That's what ties it together. These risky behaviors, unprotected sex, risky behaviors, suicidal ideation or attempts. Next, please. Okay, so when I asked you at the beginning whether you believed in free will or determinism, how do you feel now? Because I don't know about you, but so many, when I was a kid, and my mom was upset with me, and she would say, I hope someday you have one just like you. Right? And I said back to her, you're the worst mom in the world. I will never treat my kids the way you're treating me. What do? Treat my kids the same way. Because for thousands of years, our DNA is imprinted with certain things. But epigenetics is the marriage of that DNA history that we all have, and then the traumas and the experiences that reshape it. And those traumas and experiences reshape your brain because of the flow of cortisol and adrenaline, eating the myelin and changing your ability to make good decisions. Does this make any sense? I made that really simple. It's not exactly that simple. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's residual impact. And this is incredibly frightening. I'm sure you'll agree with me. This is incredibly frightening because what happens is, as the DNA changes in a person, you pass on different proclivities to your children and to your grandchildren. So by second or third generation, we've changed, modified DNA, not necessarily in the most healthy way, because it's in a response to trauma. So unless we balance that off with good resiliency, with helping kids be more resilient, right? Then you lose that. So the residual impact, if everything that I've said so far hasn't upset and scared the crap out of you, this should. Because your grandchildren didn't do anything, and yet because of your experiences, your DNA passed on certain things. We all know that, medically that will happen, but we don't always think that emotionally or behaviorally. Next to it. So what can we do? Next slide. Well, we gotta care. We gotta diminish trauma. Some we can't help. You get in a car accident, that's traumatic. But we've got to provide supports, natural supports, and other kinds of supports. Natural supports would be church, or natural support would be a baseball team, or that kind of thing. And the other is more formal supports, medication or therapy or whatever it might be. But somehow we have to provide those supports. We don't do it if we don't understand where it comes from. And when we do it, and we don't understand it, it's because we're angry at our kid. We blame them. They let us down, even though they inherited this stuff. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next one. So it's important that we build in protective factors. Meetings like this, where we educate ourselves, if you think that this was valuable. But that kind of thing, where we understand. We've all been yelled at as kids, but how much is too much? So it's how we balance these things. And then later on, we're so proud of our kids when they get to be adults. My son is 42, he still leaves his crap on the floor. It's your fault. Next slide, please. Next one, I've sort of said that. Okay, so just to share with you as we get near the end of the talking phase of this, here are the questions. These are common questions. Did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or threaten you in a way that made you think you might be physically hurt? Did a parent or other adult in the household very often push, grab, physically do something to you? You can read them yourself. Sexual abuse. Emotional neglect. Did you often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special? Physical neglect. Did you have clothes? Did you have food? Next slide. And these are all 1 point. Next slide. Was your mother treated violently, or your stepmother? Did you see that? Was there substance abuse in the household? Was there mental illness in the household? Divorce or separation, and an incarcerated parent. So any of those are the 10. Simple stuff. It's not like rocket science. But this was 17,000 people who he winnowed it down to these 10. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's share with you what this could be a little scary. As your ACE score increases, so do the risks of disease, social and emotional problems. 4, I said 4. Things start to get serious. The likelihood of chronic pulmonary lung disease increases 390%. Now, part of that may be because your brain, your adverse risk behavior didn't change, so you smoked too much. Hepatitis, 240%. Risk behavior, do drugs, bad needles. Depression, 460%. Attempted suicide, 1,220%. What are we doing to our kids? They didn't do anything. They experienced trauma, and we weren't skillful enough to help them develop the resiliency that would ameliorate this. This is scary to me. Next slide, please. Well, it's hard to see that, but that's kind of the risk reward. Next slide, please, dear. Okay, so you saw the 10 questions briefly. What was missing? Something incredible was missing. Anybody have an idea? Oh, God, I put them all to sleep.
Maybe a longitudinal look. Parent, child, grandchild.
Excellent answer, totally wrong.
You're married.
Way to go, Bob.
Actually, it's a total.
Well, environmental things. This had nothing to do with anything outside of the household. So, COVID, terrorism, I'm just going to call it political dishonesty, lack of appropriate news sources. For some of us that are a little older, 9/11. For some of us that are even older than that, the fear of having to go to Vietnam. So there were no environmental looks in that group. And so there's newer work today that takes into account the personal and the environmental, which is pretty incredible. I'll show you that in just a second. Yeah. So here's just some things to be aware of. These are the trajectory of illnesses with risks. So it's saying you see 4 risks, 3 risks, and you can see for chronic disease, lung disease, heart disease, cancer, diabetes. Next slide, please. Women, autoimmune diseases, the number of cases, look what happens to risk of hospitalization. You didn't do anything wrong. You just be swimming. But the trauma you've experienced has changed your body chemistry. Next slide, please. Depression. Again, there's 50% chance, as you saw, that it was caused by an ACE. Not 4 ACEs, just caused by an ACE. Attempted suicide, sexual assault, domestic violence, all of these things. Next slide, please. Childhood experiences with adult alcoholism. Percent of alcohol, look at that. 4 ACEs, right up there. Chronic depression. This is women. We always, back to Sigmund Freud, when he defined depression, it was a woman's disease. Well, it's not a woman's disease. But because of the body chemistry and the changes going through the autoimmune, women are more susceptible to be depressed. Suffer from depression. You can see these. Suicide, use of medication. People, I don't want to be medicated. We've changed the body chemistry. You need to be medicated to rebalance it. And there's so much tremendous research today, unbelievable research, that tells us if your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents were from Central Europe, this is the kind of medication that will not work for you. And this is the kind of medication that will. If your heritage is South American, this is the kind of medication that is more likely to work for you. If you're of African descent, this is the kind of medication. It's so amazing. And if you think about it, we see all these stories about the Chinese herbal medication, and we kind of poo-poo it, but that's kind of what it is. It's because your body, over the centuries, has adapted to certain things, just like foods and whatever. Not a holistic doctor, but I'm just trying to say. Next one, please. Almost done, everybody. Suicide attempts. Again, this is horrifying. The person did nothing except experience trauma, and all our life we're saying little Joel is a bad kid, is a difficult kid, is or whatever, and then little Joel attempts to take his life, and it's so sad. What happened before the knock, all the stuff that happened, the precursor. Domestic violence, put it here. Again, you can see this work performance, time missed on the job. When someone misses on the job, you just get pissed off at it. We don't look at what happened 15 years earlier as a kid, and we don't have time to many times. But we do know when we nurture, things do change. Sometimes. Next slide, please. Okay, just ending up. There's an incredible, if you don't care about anything I've said, there's an incredible dollar cost to ACEs. Low productivity is like we lose $83 billion in people missing time from work. The cost of healthcare, hospitalizations, of special education because we diagnose kids and put them into a behavior center. So on and so forth, criminal justice. So, if you don't care about what I said, if you're thinking I'm just an idiot, the dollar cost to our culture is amazing. Next slide, I think. Okay, so if you're interested, Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, she's one of the early people who took the ACE work and in San Francisco opened up a clinic and was looking at the environment. She didn't even know she was doing it, and ended up looking at the environmental factors of ACEs, the emphysema that was happening because of some factory that was nearby where the kids were. She went on, now she makes 25 grand in speaking appearance, but she went on to become the Surgeon General of California and wrote a manual of ACEs and the genesis and what to do about it, which I have with me all the time. It's really remarkable. Donna Jackson Nakazawa has written these two books. If you like the brain chemistry part of our conversation, she has incredible stories that give you more detail or depth than I provided. And then this is just a horrifying story. This is a family with like 5 kids that looked like they had the perfect American life, and they had murders and drugs and all kinds of stuff. It just, we don't take care of our families. Next slide, please, dear. That's all I got for you. That was a lot. So, any thoughts, any questions? Anybody want to argue about anything?
It does scare us. I guess we're all looking retrospectively at our childhoods. I know I am. And what happened growing up, again, with my kids, my grandkids. And it's like, wow. That's all I can say, wow.
Yeah. And I don't share this information to make people feel like crap, because we are what we are. But if we don't look at it, when I talk to teachers, they've never heard of ACEs. Well, how can you manage a classroom if you can't look behind what a kid is bringing in with him every day? Now, I was that kid. I was a terrible student, Bob, and really misbehaved. Big shock, right? Nobody knew. I mean, I wasn't the guy who got thrown out or anything, but you know, all that kind of stuff. I can look back at it now and say that I was addressing the kind of life that my mom was dealing with at the time. You just hope you haven't done it to your kids, but I now hope that I'm smart enough to help the community do it better. Yes, ma'am.
Joe, I was going to say, at least, now with the training and education that families, parents, they can, they can't know if they come to this type of training, but I found that the case management.
She works for a mental health association.
And what happens is when we do the ACEs, because ACEs is one of the tools that we use, if the families aren't aware or believe that cursing at them or, oh, there's something wrong with you every day, that's not a problem. So they're not aware of it because it had become their norm. And I always remind, my team that we can't force a change anything on anybody, and we can only, educate them. And also, if they're not aware of it, a lot of the things that people do is what they learn in survival mode. So they're walking it out still because they haven't learned a better tactic or a better, way to deal with it.
So remember what I said earlier on, 17,000 white people. So this did not take into account the differences in culture. Now, Nadine Burke is an incredibly erudite black woman. But if you look, so all of the research which is done on behavior in the United States, SAMHSA funds that research, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration, 85% of that funding goes to white researchers. So they're researching black and Latin people. Well, you gotta raise a question about that. Because they don't know what they don't know. We don't know, I'm never gonna be a black guy, I'm never gonna be a Latin person. So I have to back off and balance that off with what people tell me, which is why Deerfield Beach Community Cares, our program is what you tell us, not what I say or Kurt says or Jarvis says. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I'm a visitor from Virginia.
That's like another planet.
Yeah. I was very fortunate to just start attending the design visiting. And a few weeks ago, the pastor who was giving the sermon, her topic for the day the topic of her sermon was forgiveness. Now, it so happens I belong to a Christian home group, also in Virginia. Many committed Christians and many long-married couples been together many years, so in a way they're models for me. And coincidentally, they did 4 Friday evenings just on the topic of forgiveness. Okay. Now, it occurred to me, why wouldn't a topic like forgiveness not be taught, but discussed in a high school? We have a country, the USA, where half the country and the other half of the country can't even talk to one another or get along, let alone forgive one another. That's what's going on right now. Now, in high school, and after I was retired, I dealt with security in high school. And it's not an easy thing because, unfortunately, you can have 2,000 kids, and there's going to be a certain percentage who are just, they don't want to do the right thing. They're out for what they want to do, create trouble, what have you, hang out.
I would challenge that.
Well, see, the point is, you have to give all of these children, whether they are very accomplished or not, you have to at least discuss these topics that are going to affect their way of life. Like, for example, when I was in high school many decades ago, they never taught you about economics or finances or a checkbook or how to budget for anything, how to use. They never did these things, and they're vital for living today. I would submit that many philosophical subjects, not that you want to teach them philosophical subjects, but you want to expose them to the idea. How do you forgive someone that you claim to hate? Why do you hate them? Why? You see, and you have to have them think about their reasons. Now, they may come up with a reason, but that's not the point. But you have to expose them to very specific topics, specific, not general, and say, I want you to please think about this because it's going to affect your future life.
I totally agree with you, but there's a caveat. And part of the caveat in Florida, the governor says you can't do that.
The
And our
other
teachers are
caveat
scared.
is you gotta teach to the state test.
That's
I don't care what state you're in.
But the other part of it, just to be fair-handed, we do have family counselors in our schools. We do have restorative justice in some of our schools, which is a program to help break down divergent thinking in situations, to your point. There aren't that many critics of Broward County schools bigger than me, but I also need to defend a few parts of what they do.
Okay, you bring up a very good point about this teaching to, certain standards of, whatever these subjects may be. I mean,
Watch Disney World change.
well, no. The point is, someone like yourself, an expert,
I wouldn't go that far.
well, an expert should go to the governor and to the legislature and say, hey, these things are important to introduce in school. It has nothing to do with just measuring up to these state exams.
I'm going to kind of stop you because
Yeah.
that's an electorate thing. There's now one of the state legislators that wants to expand "Don't Say Gay" to 8th grade. So the
I'm
mode,
not talking about nonsense.
well, not, but that's the mentality right now. I mean, we're demonizing gay people. We're demonizing transgender kids. Anyway, talk about trauma. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to, what's your name? Tanisha? She answered a question that I had, which was, what is it, I know Deerfield Beach Cares is attempting to, but like, what is it that we can do to help, mitigate this, basically, these traumas that these young people are going through? So, I mean, and what she had to say was,
Get people
like,
to come to these
what
meetings.
was in my mind, which was education.
Yeah.
Like, things like this, educating what these adverse effects are, because if a parent doesn't know, doesn't realize it, they might not know, and like you said, they're working from the best that they can.
I think you're absolutely right, Laura. And I think there's another factor that none of us are in control of, and that's this incredible housing shortage and economy that we're in, that parents need to understand that their kids watch them like a hawk. They watch adults like a hawk. They learn from us. We think we're controlling our stress and our anger in front of our kids. We're not. They know it, they see it, they feel it. And so they have their own algebra test, whatever it might be, but they're also hear that dad might lose his job, or that we might get evicted, or whatever it might be. And there are a lot of alternatives. I mean, there's a big meeting in Broward County yesterday for United Way called it on Alice, which is working poor, basically. But there's no answers. You can spend a lot of money going to meetings, but it doesn't change anybody's life. That's an editorial comment. Kurt?
I just wanted to piggyback on a couple of things and say that as somebody who was in the classroom for 10 years and experienced a lot of this, and I think carry a little bit of PTSD myself from those experiences. I like what I'm hearing now about things like trauma-informed teaching, of course, social emotional learning. The challenge is, and I think Lynn alluded to it, of course, Joel, the challenge is to make that the norm or the standard rather than the exception, and to train teachers and professional educators in these ideas and with a skill set, with a toolbox that allows them to sort of do that mental work of helping to reach their students, but also helping, so assess the situation and help to respond and be proactive and form the learning around that. But then to Bob's comment, the standard right now is to teach to test and to teach to end of course assessments and things like that. So, this is the kind of conversation that I would love to see repeated for schools across Deerfield Beach as a start, and then, spread from there. Like, you see glimpses of it here and there, but the standardization of it, and the universality of it across the board is still to be desired.
There's certainly a lot to talk about with American education today. But one of the incredible gaps is we think teachers have talent. We think they're good at being role models. And these are mostly now these days young kids who just take teaching as a job. It's not the Bobs who were in it as a career, and like Bob or not, kids knew where they stood with it. It's right? It's now you get somebody, it's their 5-year job until they do something else. And they don't want to put up with this. So our kids who are COVID weary and who are hearing about their parents being evicted or whatever it might be, and are coming to school with more baggage, are being dealt with by people who are going through the same crap they are and are less tolerant in many cases.
I was just gonna say, a lot of the teachers, they have trauma that they haven't dealt with themselves. So it's like when you have another child or someone coming up to you and they're blowing up, and then the teacher, the only thing the teacher knows, education, it doesn't mean anything if you're educated and you haven't dealt with what's going on with you. If they blow up with you, well, you're gonna match the energy.
Everyone's got baggage.
Right. So so it's like, okay, you're doing this to me, I'm gonna give it back. So you got to teach the student, instead of trying to go in that in a different way. So we just, I don't think it's
So now Valerie's in classrooms, although fairly new at it, but I'm sure she'll have stories about the patience of teachers or lack of.
Yeah, well, back to the trauma and just being an adult and basically experiencing and going through my own healing journey. I think it's important that for me especially, it was important for me to forgive myself. I had made mistakes based on my trauma, or I had made decisions, and I think people get in such a hole that they feel like they necessarily can't start over. I feel like with kids, it's the same way. Once they make one bad choice, or if they're constantly hearing that they're making bad poor choices or having bad behavior, it's kind of, in a way, like that's like their expectation, right? So like then they're constantly making these bad mistakes, now you're gonna expect that. So I think it's important to forgive yourself first for what you didn't know and move on and do better. I had lots of conversations just like this with my own therapist, and I was talking to her one day and I said, okay, this is great for me, but what does this mean for everybody else in my life that isn't healing or isn't going to therapy and doing the things? And I've learned that honestly taking what I learned, even just me coming here and applying it to my daily life, to my family at home, expressing to them things like, hey, this isn't normal, or hey, this needs to be a boundary within our family members. And I think they noticed a lot. We just had like 30 of our family members in town last weekend, and they all were like, wow, like they noticed the work that I put in. And I just bring it to the family and apply it there. And I even watched my own mom and sister grow because of things, or change because of things that I've done or said, or boundaries I've set. So you can apply it to other people in your life, and they do learn from it. But you just have to forgive yourself and do better and apply it to the community. I remember specific people when I was young in my life that just shined to me. Like literally, it doesn't matter if you have one interaction with the person, you can make a difference. Like even with children, like you will stand out to that child just because you gave them a hug or said hi. Like it really makes a difference. And then I also used to to be very judgmental. That was another thing I said. I had a nephew with leukemia when he was 4. And I had a hard time understanding, people with addiction because I thought it was a choice and I was in that mentality. We went through this whole presentation that you just did, Joel, and she explained to me how it happens as a child and you have to empathize with the people, the children that went through the traumatic experience that most of them cause these other issues down the line. So it really changed my entire perspective on just humans and adults in general. Like you said, everybody has baggage. Even like my own father, like I just view him completely different because of the trauma and experiences he's been through, and he goes back to that fight or flight. Like it just helps me all the way around. With judgment, you have to forgive yourself and just do better.
So Bert Miller was the president of Broward County PTA. He's now going on to the state level, but the stories that he tells about the experiences, just from a PTA standpoint, and hearing the family stories, the kid at Crystal Lake and all that kind of stuff. We have to care. It's always about a caring adult. Always. It breaks everything down. Yes, ma'am. One of you, ma'am.
I was reflecting back to one of your slides when you had the large number of people that started with the dieting and how it dwindled. Just because you have the knowledge of what should happen doesn't mean that it's going to happen. Knowledge and behavior are two different things, and the behavior takes longer to take effect. And it's hard work to change behavior. And you can't do it for 15 minutes and leave the other 45 minutes to be at will. And I think that even though people may be aware of some of the things that should happen, they're so busy with everything else that they in their lives that it's taking too much time to get to the results that they expect.
You don't know how hard it is for me to go through a 90-minute presentation and not cuss. Particularly after doing cops yesterday, but all we did was cuss. Yes, self-control is a hard thing. Gretchen,
Well,
do you want to say something?
You're so beautiful. Oh my God. No, when you said the thing with the schools, I have a question. How do you change?
Don't get me in trouble with the schools.
Well, that's why I'm here, because I adore you. Any ideas, feedback, suggestions on how to change that mindset? And this is my point. I thought that because of partners, we were going to be able to have from now on, because we all went through trauma, we're going to be very open and talking about mental health and COVID and grief and everything else. But that hasn't been the case. Any ideas on how to change that mindset? How do we make people care, like exactly what you said?
Well, I don't think we have 3 more hours. I mean, I was in a meeting this morning about some of this.
Because my vision, if you ask me, I want to know everybody's age score. And I want to start with the kids that are...
Believe me, they're all thinking about their age.
Oh no, I know my age score. And I don't mind sharing my story and my age score. But I want to be able to see the kids. And I understand it's hard for the teachers. I had my own meetings with my children, and I told them, you don't have to be an expert on mental health. This is about being human. This is the only thing that I need from you. You don't have to go to school and have your master's. I just need you to be empathetic, compassionate, and kind, right? And have kindness. It's the basic thing that I want.
I mean, there's just so much.
Yeah.
There's just so many things. I mean, we teach like we did, 150 years ago. We know high school kids shouldn't start at 7 in the morning. That's stupid. They should start at 9:30. None of them are going out and picking potatoes in Maine anymore. And their circadian rhythm is not set for 7 in the morning. Now you want to start early? You can start elementary school kids at 3 in the morning. They'll be ready to go. We don't understand. So we're in many ways grounded by the way we do things. But the other thing is, I mean, there's so many pieces to what you're saying, Richard. Who's gonna be the superintendent? I know Arlene, I've known her for years. You know, why'd they fire the other one? You know, why did Runcie go? It's just, I'm not saying any of them are good, bad, or indifferent, but school is about what parents want. It's not about what's good for kids. If it was about what was good for kids, it wouldn't look like it looks. And all this accountability, if you create an engaged kid, you don't need a test, right? If kids are engaged in the subject matter, they're gonna be fine.
The whole high school model is outdated.
Yeah. We're at a point where you could be in second grade reading and seventh grade math with no trouble.
You know, Joel, I started to fight that fight about that high school time. And the reason that I was told that they can't start later is because of sports.
Yeah.
That's
And
the,
jobs.
but there's states that have changed the high school
Minnesota.
starting times, and they're doing it. So, but sports is the biggest problem. They'd be getting over at 12, 1 o'clock in the morning.
Because of the asses and seats measurement system, where if you just change that, so let them take a class at night instead and play football, you know, whatever it might be. But we're so rigid about the way we have to do it. And a big part of it is the busing, because all the levels share buses. But that doesn't address everything you
And
said.
again, if we're spending right now $3 trillion just in addiction, doesn't make any sense. If we know that this, with
Well,
all
we
the
don't know.
resources now, with all the kids in schools, so you're gonna be able to see, you're gonna be able to save a lot of money, because for them, about saving.
But people don't know this.
You know, but-
I mean, to me, I actually proposed to the superintendent that every kid should be trauma screened when they come back in September.
That's what I see.
And teachers too. And they should be screened when they come back from Christmas break or any spring break.
Governor, never let.
And that's never gonna happen, I know. But most of what I want is never gonna happen. But, you know, if you really wanna change the trajectory, you gotta know what happened before the knock. Well, I hope you'll keep coming next week. Rebecca's gonna talk to us about brain aging in a healthy way, some things that we can do. So that's exciting for me, since I have an old brain.
You have a plastic brain.